Other Record Labels is supported by Echo Creative. So your album's done and it's ready to be released. But what about your visuals? At Echo Creative, they design for the uncompromising. Founded by an independent record label owner, they craft album art that stands out, websites that turn fans into customers, and EPKs that actually book gigs. Whether it's a vinyl release, a tour rollout, or a merch drop, Echo Creative turns your vision into visuals that impress at the same level as the music will. Get studio quality design at affordable rates. Created intentionally for indie record labels like us. Visit echocreative.io and use the code OTHERLABELS10. That's echocreative.io and use the code OTHERLABELS10 for 10% off your first order. Echo Creative for independent graphic design services for your record label. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Other Record Labels. I'm your host, Scott, where we talk about the art and culture of running an independent record label. The art, album art. That's what we're talking about today. Today I have 10 tips for great album art. This is my favorite subject. I'm biased. You know that. If you've ever listened to this show before, if you've listened to interviews, I like to go off on tangents with people when talking about album covers. I'm a huge album cover fan. I have this fault, and I've had it since I was a kid, so it's definitely some sort of like I don't know, it's some sort of like something in my DNA. But like, I remember I bought this CD one time and had terrible album cover. It looked like it was like from a flyer of a grocery store, and the music was really good, but I just couldn't get into the music because the album cover was bothering me so much. And the complete opposite happens. We talk about this on the show all the time, where I see this album cover that just draws me in so much, like the design of the entire vinyl package or the cassette or just the normal digital album cover is so exciting that I want to check out the record, and it influences how I feel about the record. And through my years of designing album covers and picking stuff for myself and for my label, I have felt like I get this response, either intangible or actual explicit comments where people will talk about the artwork. And I'm starting to realize, yes, it's not just me. It really does matter. And so today on the show, I'm going to talk about 10 tips for great album artwork. Now, this isn't an episode for graphic designers or for people who are art aficionados. This is for you, record label owners and any independent artists who are getting ready to think about album covers, or maybe want to think a little deeper on the covers that you release, and interchangeable, the term album artwork, album cover. I don't really know what the term is nowadays. And remember, and we're going to talk about this in the episode, album artwork is seen in so many different ways. It's seen from big 12 by 12 vinyl covers, 12 inches by 12 inches, I believe, right? In record stores or that you hold in your hand, all the way down to like probably 100 pixels by 100 pixels, or even smaller, 40 pixels by 40 pixels on your phone when you're scrolling through Spotify. And so what we talk about today applies in ways to all of those applications that we see album covers. I have just been affirmed in the 8 years of doing this show that I'm not the only one who values album artwork. And yet I still meet people who don't understand the value of album artwork. I've done some training on this and shown some examples. There's like a free workshop that you can check out, as well as some other resources by going to otherrecordlabels.com/artwork. That's otherrecordlabels.com/artwork. Tip number 1, and this is has a great segue from what I've been talking about in the intro, and that's take it seriously. We have to take this seriously. Artwork is an afterthought for so many people, so many record labels, and so many artists, and I don't understand why. I mean, I kind of get it, right? I think that a lot of people think it's about the music, and it's the same way why we fall off a little bit when it comes to promoting the record, because we just sit back and hope that the cream will rise to the top, that the music will speak for itself. And so I worked with an artist one time, and his words resonate in my ears all the time. And he said, "Does album artwork matter? Like, does it really matter?" Like, because I said we need to find an album cover. He's like, "Does it really matter?" I'm like, "Yes, it does matter." And just too many people don't take it seriously. Your album artwork isn't just decoration. It's like an integral part of the album's identity. I've told you this before, this massive epiphany I had many years ago, where visuals is the first experience that any fan, even a diehard fan, will have with your album. And now, this used to not be true when radio was prominent, that people would first hear the music and then they would run to the record store and say, who's the band that sings this song? And they'd buy the album. It's changed a lot today. We learn a lot about new releases through Instagram. We learn a lot about new releases through seeing stuff in our physical record stores or online record stores. And so the visuals are really the first introduction. And in fact, when I say visuals, I mean the album cover primarily is the first introduction that old fans and new fans have with our releases. And so that's one of the biggest reasons that we need to take it seriously. For many listeners, artwork helps shape their perception of the music before they even press play. I've told you this is true for me. It might sound weird, but it's true. You need to treat your album artwork with the same level of care and professionalism as you do your music. That's, to me, is really one of the best arguments for this, is just to understand that we put so much time in the songwriting process. I mean, a lot of great songwriters will spend a year or more writing an album, writing every song for an album, or if it's just one single, they'll spend a long time perfecting the lyrics. And do I do a chorus here? What's the bridge like? What key is it in? What's the tempo? Then, of course, so much care and consideration goes into the studio musicians and then the mix and then the master. And we're just like listening to these mixes for thousands of times and making the slightest little tweak. And then all of a sudden we just slap an Instagram photo as the artwork and move on. I think that the entire creative presentation should be thought through at an equal level. The music, the artwork. So tip number one for great album artwork is let's just take it seriously. Let's convince our artists to take it seriously as well. Number two is consider all of your deliverables. So when we're going to go ahead and make album artwork, we need to realize that album artwork isn't just the front cover. I mean, that's a big part of it. That's the big part of it. We'll maybe call that the parent artwork, like maybe the trunk of the tree is the album cover, that square album cover you see on Apple Music in your library, or you see when the band shares it on Instagram as just a square photo, or when you see it on a CD or a record in the record store. But from there, we branch off into other things that we need. Whether you're doing a digital album cover and now we need it a little bit bigger on vinyl for 12-inch. We need it a little bit smaller for CD. Maybe we need it vertical for, as we talked about recently in an episode with High Tide. We now need to convert this into the vertical format. We have single covers. So this is very interesting that DSPs, digital service providers, and distributors often require, and this maybe is changing, but it's been a bit of a stone in my shoe for a few years, but they require artists to have different artwork for the pre-release singles than for the main album. So you upload your main album and say it's coming out in 6 months from now, and that main album has an album cover, and now you want to do 3 pre-release singles leading up to the album. It's very difficult to have your distributor release these singles with just the album cover, the actual album cover. They often will require that these singles have their own unique design. And it provides, I think it's a great opportunity. It provides some cool single looks and kind of carries the design of your album cover in through some of these auxiliary pieces like singles. But that's something you need to consider. So we're doing album covers. We have our different formats: digital, vinyl, CD, cassette. And then we have our single covers. So how many singles are we doing? We also need to consider some other deliverables like social media assets and website graphics. Each of these elements should work together cohesively to create a strong visual identity for your release. Now, if you are part of our Record Label Academy, or if you have our Record Label Marketing Strategies course, there is a very in-depth tutorial where I walk you through a great example, and I show you a ton of different visuals on other major releases that have done this, where they will take an album cover and then they'll do a bunch of different cohesive looking auxiliary images and social media graphics and single covers, and how it all ties together as part of this gorgeous cohesive campaign. That's in our Record Label Academy. I think there's like a free version of it that you can check out at otherrecordlabels.com/artwork. Number 3, and this is very similar to number 2, is consider all parts of the canvas. Okay, so I've told you about all the deliverables. We have physical media and we have social media stuff, we have digital stuff. Now, when we talk about physical stuff, we need to consider all parts of the canvases, not just the album cover. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about CDs, the old school CD. You have the album cover, which, by the way, is not a square, especially if you're doing a digipack or a wallet. It is a little, it's technically a rectangle. So that's a little tricky. When you take your like square digital cover, you realize it doesn't fit perfectly. But if you're doing a jewel case, then it is a square, I believe. And then it needs the other sides of the jacket, right? Or the insert. You pull out the insert. Is there a booklet? Does it have a back cover? The tray card, am I going to see the tray card or the back side? There's a spine. There's 2 spines on CDs. When you go to vinyl, things get really crazy. You have the front cover, you have the spine, you have the back cover. If it's a gatefold, then you have the inside. So now you have 24 by 12 inches to work with. If it's a gatefold, that's nuts. That's a lot of responsibility. Then there's a sleeve. Is there printing on a sleeve, or is it just a paper sleeve? If it's a paper sleeve, you're good. If it's a printed sleeve, then you have 2 sides of that. You actually technically can print on the inside as well of your jackets and your sleeves, but that's a lot of money. I've done it once. It's kind of fun. And then there's labels. There's a label for both sides of the record as well. So lots of pieces of the canvas for vinyl. Same thing with cassettes. With cassettes, you have a J card. A J card has a spine. It has that little back tab, whatever that's called, behind the spine. The spine is super thick, so you can't use the same one you use for CDs and vinyl because the spine is super chunky and really is one of the greatest like calling cards of a cassette is that big fat spine. Of course, you have the cover, but remember the cover's vertical. So what are you going to do? Are you going to put the square cover and then the track listing underneath like they used to do in the 80s? Bit lazy, but also kind of cool. Or are you going to have your designer create a vertical version of the square artwork? You have the inside of the J card. Do you leave it blank, or do you do multiple folds? You have the pad print or the label on the cassette, both sides. You have stickers as well, right? Are we doing marketing stickers or hype stickers or Obi strips? Lots of different things you have to consider. Merchandise, promotional materials. These are all parts of the canvas we have to think about. Before finalizing your album cover, consider how the design will extend across all formats and promotional items. So I want to highlight tip number 2 and tip number 3. Consider all of your deliverables and consider all parts of the canvas. And so here's a big tip, okay? If you're running on the treadmill, stop for a second. This is a big thing. These considerations should happen before you pick an album cover. This should all happen before you pick a main parent album cover. Why? Because we need to make sure that we can adapt this cover to the vertical cassette. We need to make sure that if we're printing vinyl and we have a back cover and we have inserts and we have labels, how are we going to match this album cover? And so, for example, if your artist wants to license a painting, just an individual square painting for their album cover, that's going to look cool. That's going to be great. But now the question is are we doing the artist's name and album cover or album title on the cover, or is it just the painting? And if it's just the painting, okay, what font are we going to use? How are we going to match the artwork? How's it going to complement the artwork? So we're not kind of impeding on the artist's vision. Are we paying this fine artist to do the rest of the work, to come up with a font that we can use? Now, if we're paying for just one painting to be used, then what about these pre-release singles? We need artwork for those pre-release singles. We can't reuse the painting. So what are we going to do? Are we going to crop little sections out of the painting? That'll work. Are we going to ask the painter to paint 3 complementary individual album covers? That could be expensive, but it could also look really, really cool. Same thing with a photograph. If you just take a cool photograph that the artist took on their phone and you want to use that, what are we going to do for the pre-release singles? How are we going to use this to create social media graphics? It's a lot easier if you ask these questions ahead of time. This all can be done with a painting or a photograph, but it needs to be talked about while you're in the design process before you settle on something. When you think about these things after, all of a sudden it's going to be really difficult to adapt some really rigid designs. Okay. Number 4, consider the aesthetic of the artist or the music. Does the artwork visually match the style and tone of the music? Your album's design should feel like an extension of your sound and the overall artistic vision. Now, do you agree? Do you agree with that? I mean, I personally think that's a no-brainer. I just could not see people using palm trees on the cover with like a cruise ship font on the cover of like a very like folksy, warm and subdued, slow record. You know what I mean? And there's just there's times where like I see an album cover and I'm like, oh man, this must be like a punk record. And then I listen to it and it's like pop, like, you know what I mean? And again, these are bad examples, but you know what I mean? You know what I mean? When you see things where I'm like, oh, this looks like a summery beachy record and the music's not matching that at all. Or it's a summery beachy record, super pop, maybe a little bit bossa nova-y, and it's got a photograph of a cabin in the woods covered in snow. That's just like, that's causing some serious crossed wires in the heads of our potential customers. They're like, what is this? You know what I mean? And so these are extreme examples, but you'd be surprised how often people overlook this. We got to ask ourselves, does this artwork resonate with my target audience? That's another thing to consider too. If you're in the punk scene, and we had a great label on recently, it was in the surf music scene, and they have a very distinct aesthetic, a very distinct look and feel to their album covers and to the merch that they do, to the point where a fan, the target audience, sees that and goes, I know what that record sounds like. I have an idea. That's my people. I get it. You know, I know that to be true in the neoclassical world, where a lot of geometric and very minimalist design kind of matches the fact that this is just a piano record. It's a very ambient, lots of space, lots of white noise to match the white space in the album cover. I love it when artwork works together, and I love it when artwork is a dog whistle to the target audience, where the audience says, yeah, I know what that is. Does the packaging format serve the fans who buy physical copies? We're talking about this in an episode of For the Love of Vinyl in a couple of months, where fans of a certain genre or fans of a certain format have an expectation of what these packages should be like. And so, you know, if you're buying a classical record on double disc and it's a, you know, extremely high produced record where real musicians played in an iconic studio, and this is, you know, the production level and the composition is just out of this world, the vinyl release for that should be very, very high quality. It should have the highest of art, you know, because this should be something that people who appreciate all of the work that goes into classical music will appreciate all the work that goes into a great, well done hi-fi release. If these releases are not getting mastered properly, if they're being pressed to like just simple vinyl and it's just a plain cover, it does not complement the music, and it's not really complementing the people who buy this format. And you go over to the punk world or to the metal world, where they appreciate incredibly well done splatter and color combinations and really unique looks. And so we need to kind of respect them. Ultimately, does the artwork help sell the record? That's what we're asking. Number 5 tip is to hire a designer. Hire a designer. Check out our sponsor for this episode. How great is that tie-in? Good job, Echo Creative and Scott. Excellent work. Click the link in the description. Number 5 is hire a designer. Just as you wouldn't let an untrained musician mix your album, you shouldn't assume every artist can handle their own design work. Professional designers understand the composition, the typography, and the color theory, everything I've talked about earlier about the deliverables and the different pieces of canvases that you'll need. Great designers, especially designers in the music industry, understand this. They understand the industry standards for printing in digital formats, the colors, the resolution, which we'll talk about. They understand all that. The technical requirements that prevent printing and manufacturing delays. Hiring a designer ensures a polished, professional product that meets all necessary specifications. Now, I'm not saying that a professional designer is going to be the best artist in the world. That could be expensive. But we know that a great designer is at least going to take your creative vision or the artist's creative vision and make sure it's presented properly as it should be. Understand? That to me is what I think is really great. Let's say you have an idea for a music video. You might even direct the music video, but you need someone who understands the lighting and the types of cameras to use, and then the coloring and the editing, you know what I mean? That technical side of things. And that's what I think a designer's for. I mean, look, there's a lot of stuff we wouldn't farm out. We wouldn't farm out to anyone who does the mastering. We wouldn't farm out to anyone who does the editing or mixing of our records. We're very thoughtful with how the music side is made. And the same thing needs to happen when we hire a designer. You know, you can find a designer. I talked about our sponsor. You could find our designer. You know, I love it when record labels have a designer that they've worked with over the years. We'll talk about an efficient way in a couple minutes when it comes to having a record label template to save money. But also like just going to Fiverr and finding someone who specializes or who has done album covers before. Even your pressing plant will usually offer a service where they'll take care of the putting together your artwork onto all of the different templates, and they'll send you proofs ahead of time. And that might be worth it to spend that a little bit extra money through your pressing plant. The cost might be a little lower through them because they have other profit built into the manufacturing process, and they want to retain you as a customer. So I've never done that before, but that might exist. I think that definitely exists with most pressing plants. And understand this too. I did an interview with a pressing plant many years ago, and he told me the number one holdup, the number one cause of delays in the manufacturing process of vinyl is the artwork. And whether that's the artists changing their minds, but mostly it's just the fact that the artwork doesn't match the template proper. The fonts weren't converted to outlines or not included in the document. The resolution of the photo is too low. It looks okay on your screen, but when it's blown up to 12 inches by 12 inches, it starts to look blurry, pixelated, whatever. CMYK to RGB, which we'll talk about in a second. RGB, I'll tell you why I get that mixed up in a minute. Okay, anyway, here we go. And number 6 is start it very early. This is a big tip. Stop that treadmill again for a second, please. Start this process early. One of the most common bottlenecks in the album production process is waiting for artwork to be finalized. Not just vinyl manufacturing, but that in particular is often delayed due to artwork issues, as I mentioned. But it's the indecisiveness of the artist. And when you have a band, oh my goodness, you have a band that has 5 members, and every member has a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a mom or a dad who has an opinion. And they all have opinions, and they like something. And one of them is like dating the graphic designer or the photographer, and they have bias. And listen, go and start this process during the recording process. If the band is in the studio, let's start talking about artwork. It goes back to point number 1. Artwork cannot be an afterthought, at the very least, just for the fact that it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a long time to create all of those deliverables I mentioned. It's going to take a long time to create all of those pieces of the canvas of physical products that I mentioned. And it's going to take a long time because people are changing their minds all the time. And it's just going to cause a little bit of rift. And then you as a record label are like, whoa, we have standards. We want this to look really good. We can't rush this. And now the thing that the band has all agreed on actually doesn't look very professional. It's going to make our label look not great. That's an issue. So start working on the album artwork during the recording process if you can, to avoid unnecessary holdups. Having the design ready early means fewer last-minute complications and just a smoother release timeline. Tip number 7, make sure it's high resolution and correct file types. This is simple. Your designer will help you with this. Low resolution artwork can ruin the otherwise great design. I'll tell you where you see this, even some major record labels. You know, for releases that came out in the 90s and early 2000s when vinyl wasn't a consideration, they have like artwork for a CD, which is like 5 inches by 5 inches. And then that artwork gets lost. And then they're like, oh, now we want to press this to vinyl. It's never been done to vinyl before. And they have to blow it up. They have to scan it and blow it up. Doesn't really work that well. Doesn't look that good. I have a couple records where I open it up and somebody's using like a low image Getty image photograph on a reissue from a major label. And it looks really bad. So that's just something you have to like. This is one of the reasons why you should hire a graphic designer. You got to ensure that your files meet industry standards. So in print, we have CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow. K stands for black. That's a color mode. We want the artwork to be 300 DPI resolution dots per inch. And so this is something that people will understand. Your pressing plant will get back to you and say, this PDF that you sent us is low resolution. I don't know if you can use Canva for this type of like massive production, but when you use some of the online apps like that, they'll throw up this little like yellow caution sign saying that this image is not going to look good when it's blown up to this size. That's the reason. I mean, you can scale stuff sort of on a screen and get away with it. Resolution can be lower when you're further back from it, right? So like a billboard on the highway can have really low resolution when it's scaled to that size. That's because like our eyes can't really see the dots per inch when you're that far away. But when we're holding a CD or a cassette or a vinyl record, it really matters. In digital world, we have something called RGB. I often say RBG because that's the name of a botanical garden near where I live. And so I say RBG instead of RGB all the time. Forgive me, but it's RGB, red, green, blue. This is the digital color composition that you see on your phone and on your computer screen. This artwork here is optimized for streaming platforms. By the way, you're going to do this really cool design with blues and yellows and or blues and reds, I think it is. And it's going to look neon and electric on the screen. And then you're going to print it, or you're going to get a proof back from the printer, and things look very muted and dull. And everyone's going to be confused and upset. And that's because when you print something, it doesn't have those beautiful LED lights coming through the back of your screen to light up your colors. It's just using a mix of inks. And inks are not very electric. Now, there are like neon Pantones you can use, but it's very expensive. And you can't use, if you're using tons of colors, it's just not going to work. So you'll notice that. The other thing to consider is make sure that you're using the templates provided. This is talking about manufacturing and physical media. You're using the templates provided by the manufacturer you're using to ensure the correct dimensions, the bleeds, the file, the safe zone. There's these like lines that will say, keep the text inside this zone. We can guarantee it's not going to get cut off of the printers. But then also we want the image to overlap so that we have bleed. You know how that works. Okay. Tip number 8, we're almost done. Consider a label template. Okay. What does this mean? Well, I hadn't really, you know that I love whenever a label has, like Coal Mine, for example, they have a marketing sticker that they use on all of their records that looks the exact same. And I think even on their 7-inch vinyls, they do the same label. The same label has been done by record labels since the very beginning. Columbia Records, OK, Sun Records have used the same label over and over. And that's really cool. It adds like a cohesive look. The Atlantic Records logo, the orange and green labels. Those are, what's great about this is not only does it connect all of these great Atlantic Records or Columbia Records or Sun Records releases. Not only does it have that connection point, but it's also cheaper and easier, and any dummy can make a new label. So look at the Atlantic Records label. Like if you're at a computer now, just Google it. And it's like that, it's orange on top and green on the bottom, or vice versa. And it has their logo, and then it has all the same fonts and the artist name and everything. Same with Columbia, the red logo. So you can, imagine if you have that as a Canva file or a Photoshop file, without any design experience, if somebody were to design that template for you, you could then, for free, every future release, just go and make the change of the label. All you have to just make sure everything is correct. And it's a lot easier to do. So not only does it have this brand cohesive look to your label, but it's actually just cheaper and easier to do. We kind of stumbled upon this. It's obviously been done since the beginning of time, but we stumbled upon it recently with our friends Lohihi Records from Hawaii on the episode we did a couple weeks ago, where they have this album cover that's essentially just a photograph, black and white, by I think the same photographer, and then the spine is a color. They just pick a color. And then the backside has another photograph, and then the barcode, and then the credits, but it's all laid out in a very distinct manner. And then the next release that they're doing is using that exact same format, except changing the color of the spine, and then of course changing the photos and changing the credits and the information. But both records look identical, aside from the colors and the photos and the names being different, but they use the same template. I imagine that's extremely efficient. You pay a designer to design that template, then you pay a designer half that cost or a third of that cost to use that same template for the next release and the next release. It's very affordable. I think it's really cool. And I think it just makes record labels look really good. The other thing to consider too is there might be, and I talked about this with our lawyer friend recently, you might, if artwork is really important to you, and if you are going this route, like Lohihi Records, if this is you, you might want to have this in your contract with your artist to say, hey, this is the template we use for our artwork. So if you're thinking about, I bet you any money Atlantic Records and Columbia had that in their contracts, right? The artist can't say, we want a different label, we want to stand out. They'd be like, no, this is our company's logo. This is our label. This is how we do it. And so you might want a contractual clause giving the label final approval on artwork. I will do that on my next label. When I start another label, I am going to I have a label in mind, and I'm going to use this template concept, and I'm going to include it in the contract so that artists are aware, if you want to be on this label, your records are going to look like this. I think this approach helps maintain a level of quality and aesthetic continuity, and also just streamlining the decision-making process for you and the artists. Number 9, real quick, test it. Test it in multiple applications. Artwork that looks great on a computer screen might not translate well across other formats, like I mentioned with color or resolution. You could print it. Just send the file to a local print shop. Do you still have Kinko's? Is that still a thing? Staples, whatever. Just send it out there and say, can you print this 12 by 12? It might cost you $10, whatever, but let's take a look at it. Let's go to a coffee shop with the artist and say, hey, now we're holding the vinyl. Do we like it? CDs, print it at home in color. View it on different digital screens and devices. So this is the biggest thing I do. When I'm working on a record and I have some rough mixes, I will take those rough mixes and I will put them into iTunes. I'll create an album with these mixes, put them in a track order. I will name the album. Tell me if you do this, please let me know. And then I will, whatever album cover I'm working on at the time, like the rough idea I have for an album cover, I'll slap it on so that outside of the studio, outside of my desk, I can open up my phone and I see the album there and the album name and the track listing. They're just demos. They're just rough mixes. And the potential album cover, and I see it as a music fan will see it. And I'll be like, you know what? That album cover looks really cool in my iTunes library. I think we're on the right track. Everything looks good. So test it in multiple applications. Seeing your artwork in real world scenarios helps you identify any issues before the final thing and just make sure, yeah, this works. I mean, the debate about whether or not you put the artist name and we've talked about this before, the artist name and the album title on the front cover. Like, you don't have to, by the way, that's not the law. You don't have to do that. In fact, 99% of the time, people will not be seeing that album cover without the artist name and the album title name directly underneath it. Think about iTunes, think about Spotify. It always has it in text format underneath it, so you really don't need it. But when you do, and I do it occasionally, I do it quite a lot, when it's so small and it's down, it's shrunk down on your phone, it's like, that thing we were arguing about putting on the front cover, we can't even see it anyway. We might as well get rid of it. Finally, number 10, don't ask for too much feedback. Well, feedback can be valuable. I personally don't like feedback, whatever. Too many opinions can lead to confusion and second guessing. Like I mentioned, you've got too many people in the band already and at the label, and then you add in all of their parents and girlfriends and boyfriends, and all of a sudden it's just, you're never going to make a decision. I hate when artists or labels send out a poll. I hate that when they're like, what album cover do you like? Art is subjective to a certain extent, and pick something that you're happy with, and you tell the fans that they're going to like it, and don't give them a choice. I avoid asking non-artists for feedback. There might be a graphic designer I respect or an artist I respect who I might send to for feedback. Or maybe I'm hiring some record label consultant who's like a sexy Canadian who has got a great voice and a face for podcasts. And I book a clarity call with them, and I ask them what they think about the artwork, and maybe that way. But listen, I avoid asking anyone for feedback. I don't know if they understand design principles. I think anybody, when you ask someone for feedback, they feel obligated to provide feedback. If they say, oh, that's cool, then that shows, it makes, they feel like they're coming off as like they don't care. So they're going to come at you with some sort of constructive criticism because they feel like they've been asked. So now they have to have an opinion. So just trust your instincts and the expertise of your designer or your artist or whatever. Just have confidence in your creative choices. Please stop asking people what they think. And listen, you might disagree. You might disagree with a lot in today's episode. That's okay. But I think that great album artwork should feel like an authentic reflection of your music. This is not a design by committee type of thing. It's just about creating a great piece of art from what's inside the CD, what's inside the digital files, to what's on the outside of the album artwork. It's not just about looking good. It's about creating a lasting visual identity that complements your music. Take your artwork seriously, and your artists will, and your fans will too. I hope you found this helpful. Thanks again to our new sponsors, Echo Creative. If you're like, yeah, I need to take this seriously, then reach out to Echo Creative to give you a hand, to give you some feedback, and to help you adapt your ideas to templates for your next album release. Go to echocreative.io, and you can use the coupon code in the description of this episode for 10% off. Thank you so much for listening.